it all this time. Welcome to the Next Gen podcast. Welcome back. We are in season 3.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
This is our third time. We were wondering, should we keep doing this?
Yeah, but the listeners, faithful listeners, we thought that there was enough of you to make this worth it.
We're doing it for you. You know, we care about you. We want you to have resources. We want you to have a place to go to when maybe things aren't going so great, or maybe things are, and you just want to make sure that they keep going great with you and your kiddos. And so we have decided to do season 3, and I'm so excited for season 3 because we might have our first reoccurring guest. Ooh, and you might have just heard her right there. We have Miss Bethany LeMieux joining us today. And so, Bethany, if you could just maybe introduce yourself and tell us why you are here.
Yes, my name is Bethany LeMieux. I'm a licensed professional counselor at a Christian counseling office called New Life Resources in the Waukesha-Brookfield area. And you guys thought it would be interesting to hear what somebody in the field might think about some things that teens and families are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're like, I'm here because you asked me to be here. You're like, what do I say to this? And we were just talking, before we actually sat down and hit record about the different things parents struggle with and different things that are happening in youth ministry, that kids are coming up to me after service and talking through different life situations. And I'm not a counselor, right? And I tell parents that when they ask me certain things, I'm like, man, I really think you need to see a professional because some things are important enough and big enough where I'm going, I don't know. I don't have this training that you have, and we would love to just hear different insights. And you have some kids of your own, right, that add into this as well, that make you not just a counselor, but you're also a parent. And so we'd love to hear from that aspect as well. And so we have some topics hopefully we're going to cover. And Phil, you want to maybe just say what we're talking about today?
Yeah, the big topic of anxiety and depression and suicide. A lot of students and adults are struggling with anxiety, even more so these days than in previous years.
Yeah.
It's always been a real issue. But, pastors are spiritual guides, and sometimes a psychological difficulty is just beyond our ability to address.
Yeah.
So we had some specific aspects of anxiety and depression and suicide that we wanted to cover that we thought maybe hit some of the more major and more common things that we hear of.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a big one for me is anytime a student comes to me talking about self-harm, my first instinct and reaction is, okay, I need to get your parent involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a thing that we just kind of, gloss over. We just go, actually, this is a big deal. I want to rope the parent in. And then what I have found is sometimes the parent goes, okay, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't fully know either. Like, I think we need to bring in a professional. So for a parent that maybe they're noticing things in their student, or maybe that this has been an expressed concern where the student says, I'm struggling. What advice would you give to a parent to even broach this subject, to talk about it with them? Maybe give it 2 points. How can you identify if your student is struggling? How do you even bring up this conversation of like, are they just a teenager, or is there something going on? And then what happens when you uncover something that says, oh, they do need help?
Yeah, because there's got to be a right way and a wrong way to approach the subject with somebody who's struggling with anxiety.
Sure.
Well, I wouldn't put that much pressure on you about a right or a wrong. I think the best thing you can do is be a curious listener. If they say they're struggling with something, tell me more about that. What's going on? I want to know. So that you don't have, if you're a supportive person in their life, you're already doing something, quote unquote, right. So don't worry, even if we say something that doesn't hit quite right, that can always be repaired if there's safety in a relationship. So take the pressure off yourself, parents, that, that there's, if you love them and you're supporting them by allowing them to seek other support, such as a counselor, that's already a huge step in the right direction. What I think is interesting about this generation is that they talk about psychological things quite a bit.
Yeah.
That they're really psychologically minded. So maybe they already have a ton of information about mental health.
Sure.
Or I have people come into my office who tell me what I should diagnose them with. I've looked on the internet and this is what I have.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, tell me more about that. Or
right.
How did you come to that conclusion? So, I do think that depression and anxiety have been around for as long as we know, but that people are just talking about it
Sure.
more freely now. There's less stigma and people are willing to bring it to the surface as opposed to being ashamed of it.
Right.
So in that way, it's a great benefit that people are talking about it at all. So if your teen brings it up to you or your preteen or child, like I said, coming with curiosity,
Mhm.
what are you experiencing? What's going on? Tell me what it's like for you. That would be step one. And if there is like significant struggling that you're noticing, such as, they used to love soccer and now they hate going to practice, or it's really hard to get them out of bed in the morning,
Sure.
or they just, they don't seem to be eating as much as they used to, or maybe they're like eating a lot or seeming to comfort with food, or just all those kind of functional things that a parent might notice in the home that their child isn't looking
dramatic changes in behavior.
Yeah, definitely. So things show up functionally that are kind of swirling internally. So those might be things that you would notice, and I'm sure they might bring it to your attention too. Like, I'm just not feeling quite right, or I think I just want to be able to explore these things or talk about these things with a professional. And for the parents to not freak out and think, oh no, did I do something wrong? Or why don't they want to talk to me about it? I could see why parents could get worried or concerned.
Sure.
But really, to allow more supports in their life, such as their youth pastors, such as people that they trust in the community, such as a professional counselor. What a gift that is to allow them to have as many supports as possible. So don't be too concerned if your teen comes up to you and says, I think I want to talk to somebody about these things. It doesn't mean you're doing a bad job as a parent. And it doesn't also have to mean that there's something grievously wrong with your child. It could be they just want to have somebody else that they can bounce ideas off of to get some feedback from. That would be a safe, trusted adult.
Especially in middle school, because everything feels bigger when you're in middle school.
Yeah.
But you bring up being a good listener and an active listener and a supportive listener. And so when you get that onrush of information from your student, is there a next step, or does the process of expressing their emotions in a large way help them just deal with it by saying it out loud? Are there additional things that we should do to respond as parents, or is there something that's cathartic in just sharing it with us, that now they've got a support, now that's enough to help them get through it?
I would say that's definitely the biggest first ingredient is the support and the openness and the curiosity, and not freaking out yourself as you receive the information, or to not inadvertently shame them, like, oh no, I'm sure you're just fine, or don't worry about it, or dismiss it. That might be a knee-jerk reaction for someone who doesn't want to consider their kids struggling. Openness to hearing about it is definitely the first step. And some of it might be resolved by connection. I just talked to my mom about it, and I feel better about it now. That could very well happen. Or some things need more coaching on coping strategies, or how are we going to deal with this? That, there's the internet, which gives ideas, but also talking to somebody who's had some schooling or education on how to walk kids through ways to deal with these things.
Well, what if you observe or are told that there's self-harm involved or suicidal thoughts? What should our reaction be, or our response be, when the depression or the anxiety has reached the level where they want to hurt themselves?
Yeah, I get why that would be super alarming. And, the bells would ring for you, I'm sure, if you heard that from your kid who you love so much, that it's hard to know that they're suffering so greatly. One paradigm that might be helpful for parents to consider if they find out their kid is self-harming, oftentimes kids will try to hide it. After they do it, there's some shame associated with it. So it might be discovered in surprise. So that's common and can definitely happen. But the way to think about it is that it's actually the person is trying to solve a problem, or they are trying to cope with something very distressing with the self-harm. I know it sounds really backwards and kind of upside down to think, how could hurting yourself be trying to solve a problem? But it is just kind of this big internal experience that they're trying to regulate their emotion. And they're like, okay, how can I recalibrate myself when I'm having this big experience. And some kids have found that doing something that harms themselves is something that kind of regulates their body. Now, we don't encourage it.
Yeah.
We don't want that as a coping strategy, but we can, normalize, hey, you've got something that you're really struggling with, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to deal with this, aren't you? So you can kind of soothe them in the idea that your hurt is being seen, and you don't need to suffer with this in secret or alone. But what we would want to do, and with the help of a professional, would be good too, because sometimes, like you said, it can be overwhelming for a parent to learn that on the onset. But to invite another support person, such as a counselor, to talk about, what are other ways we can deal with these big feelings, or what are other copings that can also calibrate us that don't cause harm and won't,
Yeah.
So here you're saying uncover the root of the problem, not the symptom of self-harm. But when you do so with help from other people and counselors who know how to deal with that.
I think there's always a root to pretty much all we do. There's a purpose for why we do what we do. And so uncovering that is just a curious journey for all of us.
Yeah.
But when it comes to self-harm, yes, like step number one after you acknowledge it is to remove the objects that they're doing to use to self-harm, create safety in the home, even if it's inconvenient.
There's some practical wisdom
yes,
there.
yes.
It's like, hey, maybe take away the things that they could hurt themselves.
So
with.
we're definitely going to do stuff in response to them saying, this is how I'm trying to cope.
Yeah.
But validating in them like, there's something going on, isn't there, that you are feeling like this is what you need to do to feel better.
Yeah.
And so validating that, but then taking the steps about what are we going to do to help you to do something different that doesn't have harmful consequences.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple questions just kind of going with our conversation. The first one is we talked about, how do you even bring this up, or how do you handle it when it's approached to you or your students going, I am struggling? Because I think sometimes our reaction is, well, your life isn't bad. Like, I give you a pretty good life, and maybe you're taking this for granted, and that can be an easy reaction. And you're showing some physical
I know. If this was on,
here.
if you saw this on video, my whole face just cringed and my shoulders shrugged. I was like, no.
But the parent might feel, undervalued, or you don't appreciate everything I'm doing for you. And what you said, I think at the beginning, is it doesn't mean it's your fault as the parent.
No.
But that's clearly a wrong way to handle this situation. So I thought it'd be fun. What are a couple other bad answers?
Oh, no. Okay, well, I did, I had an immediate disgust reaction to what you just said about like, well, your life's
I don't
good.
think you like me anymore as a person. The way you just responded, I was like, oh my gosh.
Well, my empathy for thinking of that kid who's really suffering and then to be dismissed. So I would say what not to do, don't dismiss.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just go straight to gratitude. Allow them to sit with despair for a minute, or be
interesting.
Yeah, validate their despair. So our youngest, if you want to talk about my own kids, hopefully I don't embarrass them too much. So my youngest, he's in 4th grade, but he loves to throw a pity party.
Okay.
And he gets discouraged about a ton of things. He's a very empathetic, emotional guy. And so the first thing I do is I say, it seems like you're really disappointed, or that really stinks, doesn't it? To see, okay, I see you.
Yeah.
I know you. I'm not going to ignore how you're feeling right now. But, okay, how do we pivot? How do we move past this? How do we not get stuck here? So I would say, for sure, the best way to respond first is with validation, curiosity, openness, dismissal, or going immediately to what you should be grateful for often, creates disconnect between the parent and the kid.
Trying to fix them maybe right away.
Yeah.
Just look at the bright side.
You're right.
Yeah.
That fixes everything.
That fixes everything.
And then I think talking about parents helping with coping mechanisms, I think there's probably parents who are going, I don't know how to healthily cope myself. So they're going, man, I can barely lead myself, let alone this teenager or, middle school or whatever it is.
Really good point.
What advice would you give for someone that's going, I'm struggling too, and now my kid is struggling? I don't know if I have capacity to do this. I don't know the good advice to give them. What do you think about that?
My first thought is self-compassion.
Sure.
So how to receive that with love. That kind of sounds theoretical, doesn't it? But yeah.
I think it's a good thing. Have grace for yourself in that moment, too.
Don't
right?
beat yourself up that if you too are struggling. And I think that all of us need outside feedback from time to time, especially. When I think about when I'm struggling with something with my own kids, I'm taking a walk with my therapist's best friend. Yeah. And, I'm talking to my other friends about it. I'm like, what do you see from what I'm sharing? Or what am I missing? Opening yourself up to receiving feedback from others is invaluable. To not feel like you need to do this alone or that you should be ashamed if there's something you're going through or something your kid is going through. Yeah, because we're all trying to figure out how to do our best in this broken world. It's hard. So I think all of us could use support and feedback, whether it's the adults or the kids.
And then final question, and I'll turn it over to Phil. He can ask the last question. Is we talked about this generation, they're more open to talk about mental health. There's more resources out there. The internet is full of them, some good, some bad. But what if you have a student who doesn't want to talk about it at all? How do you approach that with them? Again, for some of our older generations being like, we never talked about this, so I don't even know how to bring it up or to talk about it. What advice would you give someone in that situation where your kid is maybe more self-isolating, they're always in the room, they're always on their phone, I can't get them off their phone. I hear that a lot as well. So how would you talk to a student like that?
So we can't force anybody to do or like to talk. We can't force anybody to do anything or say anything. What a parent can do is provide space. So to say, this is a time that I'm making for you to share whatever it is you'd want to share.
Yeah.
That we can do. We can offer our availability, our openness, our curiosity. We can make a space for them, I'd say would be one way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we can't make them walk through any door, but we can open it. So,
Sure.
And then if they're not willing to talk to us, which isn't unusual,
Right.
I don't expect to be the number one confidant. It would be great, maybe, but I'm okay if it's not, and I have to allow other people that I trust into my kids' lives that could maybe they'll walk through that door if they won't walk through mine.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's come up in a previous podcast and in a few of the books that I've read is that if the only time you're talking to your children is the time that you need to correct something or deal with a problem or put on your shoes or get to this appointment or do your homework, if that's the only communication you have with your kid, you don't necessarily have a relationship. And just not addressing the issue itself, but just doing something that builds a relationship. Like, let's go out for ice cream, or let's go do something together, or can I just talk to you about my day? Build a relationship just allows doors to be opened in the future.
Yeah, great advice.
One more question, because there is so much out there about anxiety and depression and suicide, but we're inundated with more anxiety and depression than we've ever had. And so what are some of the myths about anxiety and depression that would help parents understand the realities of it better, not just what's being spewed out on the internet? Because there's a lot of confusion, I think, about anxiety and depression. So what are some of the myths that you would help parents understand?
Yeah, I would agree that the more that's out there, the less the words mean.
Sure.
So people might say, I feel depressed when they're like disappointed or
Sure,
discouraged. And I think I might have said this a few times already, but the first question, tell me more about that, or what do you mean by that? You might find out when your teen says they're depressed that they're really just bummed about something.
Yeah.
So a clinical major depression has physiological symptoms and emotional mental symptoms. So some of those things like when they won't get out of bed, when they don't do what they love to do, when eating and sleeping seem erratic or significantly changed. So those are some signs of depression. And then some of the thinking changes, the over pessimism or the hopelessness, helplessness, things are awful and I can't change them. Those are some of the hallmark symptoms of a clinical depression. And then anxiety comes in a lot of flavors. It could be like about a specific thing.
Sure.
It could be just general. I just worry a lot all the time. OCD is kind of sneaky. That's one that people are like, I worry a lot, and then I do this action, but they've never considered, oh, maybe that's obsessive compulsive. So that one's a little sneaky. So I think talking to professionals could really help tease some of that out of what are we seeing? Is this just, kind of just an adjustment thing? I'm going through something new in my life at school and I need to talk through that. Or is it more of like a clinical depressive anxiety type experience? I think talking to a professional about that could help tease that out.
Yeah, those are some really good insights and distinctions.
Thank you.
Bethany, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks
we
for
really
having me.
appreciate it. Yeah, I think you have super valuable insight and just really enjoyed talking with you today about these topics that feel so heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what I hear you saying is, one, have grace for yourself in these moments, and two, your response isn't, final. Of whatever you say, that you're having a conversation and knowing you're going to say dumb stuff sometimes.
Yeah, we all do.
But do you have the what am I trying to say? Do you have
Tell me more.
the wherewithal? Do you have the wherewithal to apologize to your kid? Hey, I didn't handle that great, and we've talked about that, apologizing to your student and how much that means to them, of being able to kind of lay down your pride as the parent and say, hey, I'm sorry I reacted this way, I responded this way. I just really want to get you help, or I care about you in this way. So I am super appreciative of your time. I know it's very valuable. So thank you for being with us today. And welcome back to season 3 of the Next Gen podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.